when we're talking about insuring a cannabis company, we're going to be looking at unusual circumstances. Welcome to our webinar. This is Jennifer Felten with Relaw Green. We are pleased to be here and be doing our Capitalizing on Cannabis conversation. Today's conversation is going to be talking about insuring your cannabis business. As like everything in the cannabis space, this is something new because 5 years ago you couldn't get insurance on a cannabis company. So today we can, and we can talk about what kinds of coverages you can get. And so we're going to do that. As for our guest, I am pleased to be sitting here with Tyler Hamilton, a former Navy member, a proud service member for our country. Thank you very much for your service. Since leaving the Navy, he has been working in the insurance space last 6 years in insurance, focusing on insuring businesses and the unique needs that a business needs in the insuring space. He works for a company called JVRC. They're here in Southern California. They're a boutique firm focusing in that space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Perfect.
Yes. And we're working in the cannabis space as the last 24 months.
So about 2 years in this space.
Correct.
Great. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the different types of insurance that a cannabis company might need. And this obviously is a very broad topic because there's all kinds of companies in this cannabis space. But let's start with what kinds of insurance would we be looking at, kind of the different buckets of insurance that could potentially be needed by a cannabis company.
I like to put it in consumer-friendly terms of 3 categories. You could get technical and talk insurance lingo, but I think we'll keep it consumer-friendly. And we'll talk about 3 categories. 1, property insurance. That's going to be your building, any type of upgrades, tenant improvements and betterments, inventory and products, as well as on-site security.
Okay, so that's going to be our property insurance, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what's next?
Our business insurance, and that would typically encapsulate the general liability, product liability, and professional liability, not to mention a couple other smaller.
So protecting your business, right?
Correct.
And the value and property that belongs to the business.
Yes.
Correct? All right. And then lastly, employer insurance. What are we looking at there?
Yes, for the employer insurance, that's where you're going to think about your workers' comp. This is your biggest line, as well as employment practices liability insurance, as well as crime, could be from the employees themselves, as well as employee benefits liability.
So these are things that any employer is going to be potentially looking at, but it may be unique needs in a cannabis space.
Correct. Yes, this is something that most businesses are all going to need and all going to have, but we're just talking about as it relates to the cannabis industry, as it's a newer industry.
Great. Okay. So within those buckets, what kind of companies are we looking at, and how are they uniquely situated?
We like to say we can service anybody from seed to sale, and that goes anywhere from a genetics company, seeding, as well as a land or a business or building owner, maybe the land that any type of cannabis operation is on, as well as a grower, harvester, processing company. Maybe they do processing for vape pens or CBD products or anything like that. Packaging company. Maybe they just do the packaging for any type of cannabis product. A lab for testing the cannabis product, a testing lab, as well as a distributor, retail, which is what we think about for the most cannabis spaces, as well as delivery services, and lastly, security services.
So, we're looking at a whole host of different types of businesses with different insuring needs, risks, liabilities, expectations, right? And so from a business standpoint, your company is going to be looking at them and saying, okay, these are the potential risks for this type of industry, and how can we serve them and protect them?
Yes, and that's where that comes into place, is having the different tailored options for your particular cannabis business.
Right, because everybody who walks in the door, you're not going to throw the same bucket of insurance.
No, not at all.
Correct. All right, so let's talk about what's going on as it relates to cannabis. We kind of opened up with this that 5 years ago, you probably couldn't have gotten insurance on a cannabis-related business, but today there's all kinds of different options and opportunities. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, the first one is the markets are opening up. More people are becoming familiar with the cannabis space, and more insurers are wanting to jump in because they see it's going to be the next gold rush, as I like to say in California. So markets opening up, as well as pricing opening up as well. Pricing is a little bit more economical for businesses to get into the space now.
Right. So whereas again, even if it wasn't available, pricing didn't matter. Now,
Right.
when it first started coming onto the market, when you only had a handful of insurers, we were looking at pretty high prices to get into this space.
Yes.
But as competition's coming into the space and different types of insurers are coming into the space, we're starting to see some changes in the market.
Absolutely, as well as some innovative programs that are coming out as well. And we can talk about that a little bit later.
Great. And what kinds of insurers? So are we still in a non-admitted world, or are we dealing with admitted carriers? Who's in this space today?
That is a fantastic question. And as you stated, it was non-admitted carriers, which are carriers that are based out of California. And that just changes a little bit about how they handle the claim situation. But with the cannabis space, we are seeing admitted carriers now, which you'll find in every other category of insurance. There's admitted carriers all throughout California, and now there's admitted carriers for the cannabis space as well.
So, when we're talking about insuring, that decision making as it relates to insuring, not only do we need to find an insurance company who wants our potential client, we want our client to have options of who they want as an insurer. And so as this market seems to be opening up, that becomes more of a viable option for the consumer. Is I don't have to just pick anybody who's willing to offer me a policy. I want to shop on my end as well. And now that opportunity is starting to come into the market.
Yes, that is a great point. People are being given options now. And I would recommend anybody that's getting into the space as a cannabis client to make sure that you're getting some options. There are options available for every line of insurance now. And that, like you said, there were years ago when you first got a policy, there were no forms, there was exclusions on things. The price is what it was. You were not able to go around and negotiate and find a different product that maybe suits your business a little bit better. And that is available now.
Right. So that's good. That means that this is really going to be something viable for these businesses.
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. So when we're talking about insuring a cannabis company, we're going to be looking at unusual circumstances as we do with cannabis because of the evolving legal landscape of the cannabis industry. The challenges that they face are often unique. So security. Let's talk about how a cannabis company is different from maybe a law firm on what type of security needs they're going to have and ensuring that risk.
Well, yes, thank you for asking that question. And I think as far as security goes, there are a number of the cannabis space that security is paramount. And especially if looking at a dispensary or a retail location, you're looking at armed security. You're looking at possible theft as well, from a lot more theft exposure, maybe from the outside world or possibly from inside, from your own employees.
Yep.
And that's something new to this space. And as well as, are people bringing on their own security? Are they hiring an outside contractor for security services? And that's going to change in your policy as well.
Right, your coverage will change depending upon how those people are being brought into the business.
Correct,
right?
Something you want to look at.
So definitely a piece of this puzzle. And part of that security risk comes from the fact that there's a lot of cash that we're seeing in this business. No one's bringing me bags of cash to pay my legal bills, at least not today.
Nope.
So, that's a different issue. So something that security and those types of issues become a challenge.
Right.
So I don't assume that most of your insurers are taking cash either.
No, not at all. Not at all. No. So that's a great point. It's a cash business. And with that, you want to look at your coverages. You want to look at particular sublimits of your coverage and the security aspect as well. Make sure you're covered adequately.
Well, and making sure that you have been able to establish a banking relationship so that you are able to engage all the different service providers that you're going to need as a professional business.
Banking has been a huge issue. And this is something dovetails right into the insurance, but something that we're seeing open up every month by month as well. And there are some unique and viable banking options that are available coming into 2020. And we're really excited about those changes in the industry.
I would say absolutely true. Whereas a year or two ago, the options for banking were very, very low. We're seeing more and more opportunities and options for them to be able to get into that space.
Thankfully.
So another unique challenge, I don't have products that I sell as a law firm, but they do. Right. And so, the use of a product that has a lifespan And the expiration of that lifespan and that risk of product spoilage is something that is an issue in the cannabis space, correct?
Absolutely. We're working I work in an office space myself, obviously. And so that's not something that we come across, nor is it something that most white collar industries come across. This is something that maybe the food industry would be a little bit familiar with, but product spoilage, absolutely. And that could come into play in a multitude of ways. One would be maybe for a grower, for maybe a location that is harvesting. You could have product spoilage there, and that would be a little bit different. But what we're also talking about is at the dispensary level, at the retail level. Maybe you have a product on the shelf for quite some time, and that product might go bad, and that might be on a mass quantity, maybe tens of thousands of dollars, maybe higher.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you have a specific coverage for that, called product spoilage.
Perfect. So again, a way to protect yourself from the risks that are inherent in this type of business.
Absolutely.
Another thing, as this industry is growing and developing, there's all these different intellectual property rights and values that are being created that we want to make sure we have some protection for.
Yes, and this is something that we're seeing more in the digital space. We're seeing more in the technological space.
Yep.
And the year's 2020, right? Everybody's online. Everyone's got their business online. Everyone's utilizing social media. And with that, along with so there's that aspect, and that's the cyber aspect. And we're seeing a multitude of cyber claims come up all across the board, not just in cannabis.
Yep.
But along with that, yes, creating a company and creating your own trademark, creating your brand, and making sure that you're speaking to the correct legal professional to help you with that and navigate those waters. And then we can help you on the insurance side, make sure you're covered adequately to make sure you're protected in the case of a claim or a lawsuit.
Right. So protecting those. We don't always think of it as something of value, but intellectual property can be more valuable than physical property in some circumstances.
Absolutely.
So you want to protect it. The next piece that is unique is that it's such a highly regulated industry. So that compliance aspect creates good and bad things from an insuring standpoint, correct?
Yes, that's a great point, because people think of compliance as this pain that drags my business down and I have to deal with all these compliance issues.
Yep.
But actually, in this space, we're seeing how important that is. And a good example of that is CBD versus cannabis. The CBD industry is facing a lot of claims right now because they are not under as strict of guidelines on the compliance, whereas the THC market is heavily compliance, heavily outlined, heavily guided, and regulated.
Yep.
And with that, we're seeing a lot less claims in that space, which is very interesting. You would think CBD would be a lot safer, and that's what the insurers were thinking right off the bat. They're seeing not the case now. So now they're trying to look at more compliance for the CBD industry as well.
Yeah, the regulation creates need for attorneys and compliance and all of that. But if you actually are complying, then you're a less risky business because you actually have a set of systems and procedures in place.
That's right. The carriers love that.
So it's one positive to all the lovely regulation. Here we go.
Yes.
More value add for you guys right here. So the last one we have on some of the unique challenges for cannabis are the unanticipated exposures as it relates to cannabis, things that you weren't thinking about as a cannabis business.
Something that we're seeing more is a lot of these retail locations. Some of the employees there are fans of the product themselves, right? And they do have a drug-free workplace. So we're seeing that come up more, and we're not really seeing any claims arise out of that yet in the workers' comp area or in the general liability. Maybe you have some exposure there where people are using the product, and that could be consumers, that could be employees as well. So that's something that hasn't even really come up yet, and this is such a new industry that we're going to be seeing more and more, and the risk assessment hasn't even caught up with it yet because it's so new.
As an attorney, I can just see the lawsuits blossoming into the world of, employee hurts themselves and they were high on the job, right? And is that going to affect the coverage?
It will.
Or, from a lot of policies, you have to be an innocent, right? So an E&O policy, you can't willfully create an error and get coverage, right?
Absolutely.
So whether it's willful or negligent makes a big difference. So if we've got someone who knowingly is under the influence, is that going to affect potential coverage? right?
Yes, it does.
It absolutely
does.
will.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
We will definitely be seeing denials of coverage, and those will be some of the reasons. And whether, as an industry, we'll be able to fight the insurance companies on the claim side of trying to get that coverage is going to be one of the new emerging markets in this space.
Yes, that's an unanticipated exposure.
Unanticipated for sure. All right. So the next piece we're going to talk about is some war stories, right? We want to talk about some real examples to give you guys, take it from theory to reality of some of our clients and how they have been affected by their lack of or their ability to get insurance. So our first example is going to be a testing lab and what type of insurance they had and what type of insurance they probably should have had.
Yes. Unfortunately, I hate talking about these, but I do find that they are valuable to explain what can happen, unfortunately. And so this was a testing laboratory that I just acquired a couple months ago. And we went in for the initial consultation, and they said, we have general liability. We're all covered. It's general. It covers everything. Well, unfortunately, no. Your largest exposure there is your professional liability. So we had to go over what that means. And we talked about a specific claim situation where the testing lab gets the product from a dispensary. The dispensary gets sued because someone got sick off of their product. Well, the dispensary passes that right off to the testing lab. And they said, the testing lab tested it. They said everything was fine. We sent our batch in. So that's important because the testing lab, unfortunately, is not going to have any legal way to recoup that.
Right.
Because, and that's why you need an insurance policy to cover professional liability, because you are on the hook. And so this testing lab was able to say, no, we have millions of dollars of equipment. All of our equipment is calibrated.
Right.
Every so often, we have people come in and audit our calibrations, and we also have our policy. So we're going to be represented by our legal team, and we're going to fight this. And they didn't end up having to pay.
Right.
So
like with me as a law firm, I have professional liability. So if I give someone bad advice, we're insured and we're protecting them. For them, their testing is their
that is correct.
Their commodity.
That is their liability.
Right? And so they have to have a policy that protects that, not just the business, but that unique aspect of their business.
Absolutely. Right. And something I want to touch on too. There's errors and omissions or professional liability. They're both basically one and the same. It's just a difference of vernacular for what industry you're using. Right. We like to use E&O a lot in the white collar services, and then which is errors and omissions. And we hear professional liability a little bit more in the manufacturing space, but they're basically the same thing.
Right. Yeah. But so that's not going to be something that's covered under a general liability policy.
No.
Right.
No.
And so knowing that, making sure you're protected on both sides is really, really important.
Yes, it is.
So our next example, we have a dispensary who co-branded on a product and, wasn't thinking about themselves as a manufacturer and, had a claim as a result of it.
Yes, this was a new client of mine as well that we went in for consulting, and unfortunately, they came to me because they were just clueless about all this stuff. And they said, we have general liability. They thought that's all they needed. They end up having about 5 policies now. But that was one of the things, is that they told me this story of how they had this product liability claim before. And what happened was they co-branded with one of the manufacturers. And they said, we want to put our brand on there as well for exposure,
right,
to grow in the local area. Let everyone know that we're part of this as well. We're branding on this.
Branding's valuable.
Well, it is, until you get a lawsuit
Risky too.
From the manufacturer. The manufacturer was sued because someone got sick off of their product. And then, so they went and just passed that along to the dispensary. The dispensary was hit out of nowhere. They had no idea this was coming.
Right.
Well, they co-branded. And so they are on the hook for that product liability. So that's just another unintended exposure that needs to be covered.
Right. Well, I will tell you, as an attorney, if we're going to be in a lawsuit, we want as many pockets to pay those costs and those damages as possible. So anybody who's been in that chain is going to be part of that lawsuit.
Correct.
That's part of the deal.
And that lawsuit could end up being $50,000, $100,000. In this case, it was about $85,000. But that can go up, and it can be very time consuming. It can be very stressful, and it can be a lengthy process. And you're paying all that out of pocket, by the way. You're self-insured if you do not have a policy to protect you.
Right. So even if you do have a policy, let's talk about when you have a policy, how is that going to be covered? And it depends on how you've written your policy, correct?
Absolutely. Yes. This is a very good point. And that's where you want to look at your forms and you want to look at your coverages. And yes, this is a great point. Just because you have product liability, unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. You need to look at your forms. You need to look at your policy. How much coverage do you have for product liability? Are your defenses inside the limit or outside the limit? And that's where Jennifer comes in with the legal is, are you going to be paying, let's say you have $1 million product liability policy and you have $50,000 defense inside the limit. Well, that means you're only going to be getting $50,000 and it's going to be coming out of your $1 million total limit. Yep. So really, you want to protect yourself the best. You want to get a defense outside the limit, and you probably want to boost that up a little bit depending on your exposure. Something you want to talk about with your broker.
Well, and those things are going to affect cost. So it's something that when you're initially deciding on a policy, having the right person guiding you and saying, okay, here's your options, right? This, if you have a claim, this is what's going to happen. How do we want that covered? The more that those attorney fees, and we are very expensive, I'm afraid, the more those attorney's fees, if they're coming out of the coverage, it diminishes what is available to cover the claim, and then you're exposed to anything above that. Right?
That's right.
So very, very important. You think you have $1 million and $200,000 of it goes to the attorneys. Now you only have $800,000 in coverage.
Right. And then someone might look at your $1 million and they may say, I'm going to sue for $1 million. Not knowing, they don't know that you have $200,000 inside the limit. So, yeah.
Yep. So very, very important. Because in litigation, they're going to be able to find out how much coverage you have. That's part of the discovery process. So your claim is often, I will tell you, very often, very close to how much coverage you have, because they know that money is there potentially to pay that claim.
Yes.
Right. All right. So our next potential risk, employment practices claim against a dispensary. So let's talk about what happened to this dispensary.
This is another one, unfortunately, that I had to be the bearer of bad news. Went in on a new client, and unfortunately, they gave me a horror story about an EPLI claim that they had, which is Employment Practices Liability Insurance. Again, they only had general liability and they had workers' comp. Yep. They actually went above and beyond in their mind, right? And they said, we're going to cover our employees. We're going to make sure our employees are totally covered. That's why we have workers' comp. Well, unfortunately, that was not the end of the story. Employment Practices Liability Insurance is a huge, huge exposure for these type of businesses. You may have 30, 40, 50 employees, and Employment Practices Liability Insurance is going to cover sexual harassment, sometimes wage and hour lawsuits. It could cover wrongful termination. It could cover any number of host of things like that incur in the workplace, more HR related issues, but those are very common.
Yeah. Well, and I think in this industry where you've got a different group of customers and a different exposure level, there's no question that these exposures are probably higher than it would be for the average traditional business.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're talking a lot of minimum wage employees, lower waged employees, and people, sometimes they're coming in, sometimes they're temps, sometimes they're only working there for a short amount of time. And unfortunately, quite often what you see is there's a disagreement between the employee and the employer.
Right.
And after separation, the employee says, well, I need some extra money. So I'm going to sue the employer because they touched me on the arm one time and I didn't like that. It was 6 months ago. I never reported it to HR, but now we're going to sue and we're probably going to win because it's a sue happy state in California. Unfortunately, it's very employee friendly.
Well, and that's one of the things is California in particular has laws where if an employee has a claim against their employer and they prevail on that claim, the attorney's fees for that employee are paid by the employer. So there's an incentive for those attorneys to go out and take those claims because the employee doesn't have to have the cash to cover the cost of defense. I mean, the cost of prosecution of the claim. The employer is going to pay those coverage. Not only are they going to hire their own attorney to defend themselves, they're going to pay for the employee's attorney to sue them as well.
Are you a lawyer or something? Man,
crazy, huh?
So good talking to you about this.
It's what we do, I'm afraid. And those are the risks. So, you have double exposure on an employment claim. So an EPLI policy is something to highly consider if you really want to have that protection for your business.
So true.
So again, we talked about this at the beginning, that security guards are a unique piece. I don't have a security guard at my office, right? Hopefully I won't ever need a security guard at my office. But the reality is that at most of our clients' offices, and even at the grow facilities, even at those, security is a huge issue. And so that's a unique feature that they have to manage this exposure on, correct?
Yes, and this is one that luckily the client did have the insurance in place. This was a client of mine, security guard for a cannabis space. They are an armed security guard. They have all their licensing, everything's all their ducks in a row per se. And this was an assault and battery claim where there was an unruly customer. Customer didn't pay, and they were having some issues with the staff. So security guard went in there and said, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." And the client refused to leave. So security guard had to gently put his hand on him. He had to escort him out of the building. And once they got outside, the customer tried to start getting physical with the security guard, unfortunately. And the security guard used all of his tactics that he's employed to do. And he said, "Sir, I'm going to have to detain you." And the guy said, "Absolutely not. You're not going to touch me." And they got into a little tussle. He had to detain him. He had to call the police, and the police arrived. And the client, the person who alleged this sued the security guard for assault and battery. He sued him. He sued him for assault. And he said, but luckily, the security guard had the assault and battery sublimit on his professional liability policy. So he had general liability and professional liability, and he had the assault and battery sublimit, which is huge. And that's something that you would never think about.
No. So again, having the right professional being able to guide you and say, okay, what are the things you're doing? What kind of coverages do we need to make sure we're covered for all the different potential liabilities and risks in our business? So last but not least, a war story about workers' compensation and the fact that cannabis companies have workers' compensation obligations just like any other business.
Yes. So I was working with a grower a couple of months ago, and it was a family business, started out, him by himself. He had a couple of family people come in, his cousins, brothers, whatever. And they were just helping him package his product and move it along the process. And one of them got injured, and they eventually got hurt, and they said, I have to file a workers' comp claim on what, the injury. See, he'd been paying them, all that. But he didn't have a workers' comp policy. He said, "This is my family. I'm just a small-time grower. I don't need workers' comp." He said, "It's my family. What are they going to do?" Well, when your family gets hurt, what happens?
They're going to sue you.
They're going to sue.
That's what happens.
And so, unfortunately, this was a story that I said, "Man, I don't know, who would advise you not to do that?" But he ended up getting workers' comp now, and now he's covered. But yeah, this was a huge thing. And not only are you talking about paying out of pocket for claims, which can be astronomical, but you're also talking about the violations. You can be shut down. You can have your business shut down. And I've unfortunately seen that as well. And that is not a pleasant picture. And it's very hard for you to open a business again after you have something like that occur, because you're on the spotlight at that point.
Well, because workers' compensation is not optional. It is
correct.
Mandatory insurance in the state of California if you have workers.
Yes, I feel like that's something I should have said, but yeah, absolutely.
No, it's true, right?
Should have made that point.
So we've been talking about all this stuff. So let's wrap it up, right? We'll summarize. What are the key takeaways that our viewers should consider from an insuring standpoint so that they can move forward on this potential endeavor of moving into being an insured business?
I want to say there's three things, okay? The first one is hire. Hire an advisor that can help you navigate the insurance landscape, okay? Someone that's familiar with this space, understands the unique needs of a cannabis business, not just a generalist, not just somebody that does all kinds of insurance, and they say, yeah, I can help you. You really want someone that knows what they're talking about related to cannabis.
Yep, that makes sense. Obviously, you're perfectly situated, so we're so glad you're here to do this. What else?
Familiarize yourself, okay? Yes, it is important to have a trusted advisor. That is crucial, number one, right? You run a business, but it's also important for you to understand your business and understand the insurance aspects of that. So familiarizing yourself with all the different aspects of insurance and understanding that way when you talk to your broker, maybe you can give him some tips about your business and something that he might not have known about that he can now guide you about how to insure properly.
So actually read the policies?
Yes. Read the policies, read your forms, read your exclusions, understand all of that.
Because the reality is there may be something in there that's excluded because the insurance agent didn't know that you needed that coverage.
Right.
And there's a potential to get that exclusion removed, revised, if necessary.
Yes.
But you're the technician. You have to help us as the professional know what you need.
Right. Give me the info so that I can help you out.
Perfect. And then what else?
Collaborate, or find a trusted advisor that collaborates. Somebody that works with other trusted advisors, right? I'm an insurance professional. Jennifer is a legal professional. We work together, we collaborate, and as well as other accountants, other banking executives, other people like that in the industry on the back end, on the business side. Now, if you don't want to take that on yourself and you say, you know what, I run a whole business, my business is what I do, I don't need to collaborate with other professionals to help me out on that, that's what we're here for. And that's what you should find, an advisor that collaborates with other trusted professionals that can make sure they encapsulate your business and make sure you're risk adverse.
Well, this is, again, with cannabis, we're so uniquely situated. You can't just walk up to any insurance broker on the corner and assume that they're going to know and understand or be even able to write a policy in the cannabis space. Same for attorneys.
Absolutely.
Not every attorney is going to be competent and capable of advising in the cannabis space. So making sure that all of the people that you're dealing with and can be the support system for the clients are properly situated and educated to provide the services.
Could not agree more.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching this episode of Capitalizing on Cannabis. We're so glad that you're here. And if you do want to see more of our videos, they're on our website and on our social media channels. If you like this video, you can like and let us know, make comments, and or subscribe to our channel. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
And again, Tyler Hamilton with JVRC Insurance Services. And you can find us at jvrcinsurance.com. We actually have a cannabis landing page, and we can get some information about you and learn more about and see how we can help you out.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.